musicians travel from Western Canada. There's a composer who works out of Estonia, but who also works out of Edmonton, Dr. Pinchback, and he and I go way, way back. We were doing concerts of electronic music together back in the 80s. And so Dr. Pinchback had arranged this trip to do, for a bunch of us to travel to Estonia and be artists in residence. And my plan was to go in to record an album there. I was still working. I hadn't retired yet. So I was still working as a social worker. So it would have been a nice little trip and a nice vacation for me. But I needed to come up with a patch that would produce a lot of voices, but would fit into my small travel case. And I started to experiment with, and I've really done these experiments early on in the videos of the Krellberg variations. I actually show how I did these experiments. I was doing experiments using a Doepfer joystick. So I was experimenting with a basic simple Krell patch, and I'll do this quite often. I set up a very simple test patch, set it up to an oscilloscope, and then I'll fiddle with ways that it's being controlled and listen to and watch the output. So I was fiddling around with a joystick controlling how much the two LFOs were controlling the rise and fall of the Krell function and how fast those two LFOs were going. And then I decided, well, what would happen if instead of using the LFOs, if I just used the joystick and patched it directly? And so then I tried that, and that's a really, really simple patch. But for a Krell patch, it's really cool because you get two axes. You get, X and Y, and one of them controls the speed of the rise, and one controls the speed of the fall. And as long as you keep that joystick moving, then you've recreated Todd Barton's original Krell patch, but you're taking the place of the two LFOs.
Yeah.
So as long as it's moving, then you get this output that's a lot like the regular Krell output. But if you hold it in place, then it just becomes like a regular repeating rise and fall function. And that got me thinking. I really liked that. It was really, really expressive. And I had one of these Doepfer antennas. So then I thought, well, the Doepfer antenna can push out negative and positive voltages. Like you bias it and you wave your hands around it. So that would give me better, finer control than the joystick. So then I had to go and found a second antenna, and then I patched that up. So now I'm using two antennas to control this single Krell voice. And then that was pretty fun. Like it was a lot of fun to sit there and kind of play with it. So then I got a third antenna. I ended up having to buy more function generators. So I got an IntelliGel, their new, it's called a Quadrax. They're 4-channel function, which is a great compact little, perfect for that kind of thing. And then I patched it all up. So I had like 3 voices running with these 3 antennas. So I would assign an antenna to be the rise of one function, but the fall of another function. Then another antenna would be the fall of another function and a rise of another one, all the way around in kind of a round robin patch. And I had to draw this out on paper to see all the different ways I could patch it up and what that would be like. So I got the whole thing going. I stood in front of it, and it sounded like crap. It was nothing like what I expected at all. The patch just sort of laid there and didn't do anything. And it wouldn't produce anything that sounded musical at all. So I knew that I had to be doing something wrong, because when I created the same patch hundreds of times before using LFOs, I would get such interesting output.
Yeah.
And typically what I'll use is a quantizer as an input to drive all these voices. And then the quantizer spreads out to all 3 voices, and they each grab their own voice. And the quantizer runs very, very fast. It's basically like a very fast arpeggiator. So it allows each voice to grab whatever note or little runs of notes if each voice is moving fast enough. So then it occurred to me that the reason that this wasn't working is that I had built a musical instrument that I didn't know how to play. I didn't know what to do with my hands. And so I made videos of myself and I looked at it. It looked sort of strange. It didn't look like I was doing anything at all. I was just waving my hands around. But then it occurred to me that I've got to learn where to position my hands to get certain outputs and how to keep them moving, to keep it sounding fluid. And so then I practice and practice. Well, meanwhile, the pandemic hit, the whole trip was canceled. And so that was a real downer. But I stuck with it because I wanted to release that piece. And so then in the fall of 2020, I did a 2-video series that explains how that patch works. And then I released that album. The album is entitled A Rush of Souls. It's on my Bandcamp. It's quite a challenging album to listen to. It's a big, long, strange sounding thing. And it was recorded as a single live performance of me in front of these 3 antennas. And then by that time, in order to inject some percussion, I brought in a microphone controlled noise source and vocoder. So I'm using both my hands and I'm making noises into a mic that sort of these little burbles and these little percussive parts.
Yeah.
So what I had to do, and night after night, sitting there practicing where I would move my hands, and then I found a way to send the rightmost antenna's voltage to the melody oscillator essentially through a high pass filter, so that I could wiggle my hand really fast and it would send vibrato right from my hand to the oscillator. But by using what we call, I guess it would be what we call like DC coupled or AC coupled, it ignores holding voltages. Like it'll ignore steady voltages. It'll only pass voltages that are moving fast enough.
Yeah.
And so I tried to get that point to be about 5 hertz, so that if I did a vibrato, it would pass the vibrato to the oscillator. But if I was just moving in and out of the antenna slowly, that wouldn't change the pitch. But I could do all kinds of cool things like little swoops and things, and it would patch, it would move those on. So that was the beginning of the idea that I could control a Krell patch by using my hands and the antennas in place of the individual LFOs that normally can control it. And this was a real change. It was a real eye opener, because now it was like I was performing, like almost like jamming, like you would in a jazz jam session. It's like I was performing with someone else, but the someone else was the rest of this generative engine. Because what I found is that by speeding up the melodies of all the parts, by bringing my hands in closer, I could get it to do little runs. And when I heard a note that I liked, if I pulled back, it would hold that note. So I could hold individual notes and chords. So when people see me do it, they often fall into the illusion that I'm playing a theremin. And a lot of people at Dutch Modular Fest commented about that. A lot of people have commented on videos that I'm playing 4 theremins at once, but I'm not. What I'm doing is, like, I'm one step removed from the actual melody generator of the patch. I'm kind of in the background. So I'm there. What I wanted to do was to create a patch and a piece that would feel like I was conducting it. I could make it louder and faster.
Yeah.
And bring voices. And so that's sort of how that all started. And I fell in love with that approach. And then, of course, it occurred to me that that would look great in a live performance, because you'd see me waving my hands around.
Yeah. Yeah, then you really are performing and not just diving in a case and not giving anything to the audience.
Yeah, and typically the way that I tune it, because it needs to be finely tuned with the antennas, is that if I step back from the antennas so that I'm out of their control range, and that control range gets bigger as the system heats up. So when I performed in Utrecht in September, it was so warm in that room, and there was so much electronics that the bubble of CV control was really, really big. And I had to do some retuning as I was getting started in the piece. But if I step back, it just slows down and stalls.
Yeah.
So I have to reach into it. So then it's very sensitive to where my body is, because my body will pick all the antennas. And then, of course, by the time I made it, get back to my favorite city, Utrecht, for that performance at the Modular Fest, I had added another antenna, and I was doing the whole patch using a Quadrax. So I was running 4 of these.
Yeah.
So a Quadrax has 4 function generators. Each function generator has a rise and fall. So that's 8 possible destinations for CV voltages. And I've got 4. So each antenna controls more than one destination, and they'll often do it in positive or negative ways.
Yeah.
So I basically create an array. And so it's sort of like I'm holding a giant joystick and moving it around, but you don't see it. I'm doing it in the air.
Yeah. Yeah, and it must have, you also talk a little bit about this in your other video where you explain this patch more in depth.
Yeah.
So, and I want to talk a little bit now about the role of improvisation in such a process, because in your video you described that the process to get, to decide, okay, this antenna is going to do this and this, that you have to try that and repatch and improvise and practice.
Yes.
And can you tell a little bit more about this process? For example, maybe a time that you realized, oh no, this is really not working, I want to change it right now.
Yeah. So as soon as I created the patch, what I did probably 10 months ago or so, once I knew I would start working on something like this, and then eventually, as soon as Dutch Modular Fest was announced, I started firing off emails to Allert to see if he would agree to have me come for a visit. So I designed the patch and I put it together on my big system. And then the fun is trying to squeeze that into the small system. The benefit to using the antennas is they take the place of a lot of circuitry. So I actually save on module space because I'm actually doing a lot of the work myself. So then what I had to do is I had to sit down once again with a pad and paper, because I'm not particularly bright. I'm an old man with a bad memory. So I had to make pictures of the antennas, and then I had to draw little lines so I understood all the different ways that 4 antennas could control 4 function generators with 2 CVs each. And I'm not only am I controlling the rise and fall, I'm also controlling the shape, because the Quadrax lets you control whether or not it's log or exponential, and then whether or not it's due to the attack or it's due to the decay. So I've got some of that
12,
as well.
12 CV points.
Exactly. So then I've got all these lines on a piece of paper, and I'm coming up with every possible different way of doing it. And then I have to sit down, and unfortunately with Quadrax, you do it all in software. So you do some button pushing, which is very confusing for me. But that way I was able to test all of these. And then I would sit and play with each one to try to decide which ones were musically viable. And I honed in on about 3 of them, practiced with those 3, and then started making changes. But even right up until I was traveling, I was still tinkering with it and making some changes with it until I got something that I really liked, where essentially there's 2 halves to it. One set of antennas this way is controlling 2 voices, and the set of antennas this way is controlling 2 voices. And so in videos, when you see me performing, you actually see me going from side to side with my hands, and I'm doing that to call up these different, so one set of voices will race ahead of the other, and the other set races ahead of that. But that was very, very time consuming. It's a very, very slow way of working.
Yeah, but it's something that you really have to experience if you're going to play it, right? I don't think you can fast track this process.
Yeah, and I have a real theory that one of the responsibilities of modular, like the beauty of modular and the power, is that there's so many patch points, and the actual piece itself, like the real the real thought process happens in the cables. Like you're actually imagining all all this information, all these voltages and all these functions traveling around in your head, and then you're patching it all up and doing something. But there's a lot of responsibility once you have that much power to be able to make sure that you understand what's happening, and that you're in control of it, and that you've worked it out, you've experimented with it enough so that you're creating something that's musically viable.
Yeah. Yeah, very, very interesting. Let me check my list of topics. Yeah, this is maybe a bit of a well. So I mean, we agreed that system design and composition that they are processes that have a lot of overlap when you're working with modular.
Yeah.
But as you've also been telling, is that when you are busy with your tone rows, I mean, of course, this is also a system, but it's not as much system design, but that's really a composing thing to do.
Yes.
And can you maybe also give an example of like what's your most system design thing that you like? Is there a point in your process where it's very little about the music and very much about the system?
Yes. Yeah, when I was working on the Krellberg variations, I was so deep into multiple layers of CV controlled, step controlled switches and sequences, because there's a lot of sequences running in the background piece that, you know, I could literally have just left all that patched up, left all those sequences patched up, and then changed up all of the voices, and even put in regular sequences and quantizers that created just regular, you know, kind of techno sounding sequences and beats, but still used the sequences in the background that were controlling filters, brightness, scale types, and effects, and the mix. Like all that is, it's literally a separate, I actually call them engines. When I patch, I'll create a thing called an engine. And in the Krellberg, there were many of these different engines. So in my world, by definition, an engine is a subpatch that doesn't need the rest of the system to stand on its own. Like it can be there doing its own thing. So an example would be a mixer that had voltage control panning. Like if you set up some kind of fancy mixer that did some tonal things and some voltage control panning and effects, you could put any audio you wanted to there, but it's its own system running.
Yeah.
Another would be a bunch of my Krell functions that are running just on their own without any voices. You could bring in whatever voices you wanted, sampled voices, physically modeled voices like elements, or analog voices like I've and yeah, so to answer your question, that part of the process and timing it all out is very, very much a systems. You know, and there would be long stretches. I'd work for hours without listening to any music because I'm using a stopwatch, watching these sequences very slowly shift forward to time them, all based on this master clock, you know, to get it to run length of time. And then making sure it all resets properly.
Yeah. That must have taken quite some tries.
It was exhausting. It was really, really, like you know, when I worked on the piece Rush of Souls, I thought I was going crazy. And there's a video up that describes how I worked on that patch for 7 months to get that piece finished, right? Which is, I think, some kind of record on Modular. I do have a patch that's longer than that, but I haven't revealed that one yet. So then when I worked on the Krellberg variations, that was also months and months of work. And in fact, I haven't the last Krellberg album. I've printed the score out, but I haven't finished recording it yet because there's one more Krellberg album to come. And I will reveal it here. It's so strange. It's just the funniest thing. when I got to recording What the Mountains Said, and that's an album that's about my backpacking trips to Canada's tallest mountain, Mount Robson, and Mount Robson is in the province that I live in, British Columbia. So I've made 4 trips to the north face of the mountain throughout my life. And so I had taken that, those are my pictures of that face of the mountain.
Yeah.
When I worked on those 2 pieces, it occurred to me the evening that I was recording it all, because it becomes an automated process. So, recording it's not too bad. I don't even have to listen. Machines do everything. And I actually record it multi-track into a Mac and then mix it later. But as I was recording it, it occurred to me that I could do one final album. So I set up the whole machine, set up a whole different set of scales, sort of more melodic scales. Like you might see in impressionistic music, that kind of thing. So I set up a whole bunch of scales and I created 4 movements. But instead of recording the Krell output and recording the sounds of it all, what I did is I recorded just the oscillators, their start and stop, into the computer, and then used a computer algorithm to turn that audio into MIDI.
Yeah.
Then I took those MIDI tracks and mashed them together and then converted them into a score. And then I arranged that score into the 4 separate movements for guitar. And my twin brother, who's Edmonton's premier jazz guitar player, has been practicing that. And we're going to do a live recording. So he'll actually play guitar. And so while he's reading, he's going to read through 4 movement Goldberg variations. And so then the question is, I'm always wondering, like, do generative processes create real music? Like, it's kind of an experiment. And so my experiment here is, if someone plays the guitar and he's reading a printed score, but the score was generated by this analog modular synth, is it real music? So it's a big experiment, and it's pretty weird sounding.
I'm very, very curious to that. Very curious to
I'm hoping.
But it's not what I think is interesting is that I mean you only have now the machine as a sort of transformer, right? Because you as a composer has a lot of influence on the note material. Then what it and the what and the when and the whys of the notes are decided by the modular. But then you have a musician playing this again.
That's right.
So you have a very
the long,
interesting,
complex process that goes into arranging it into printed music that a musician can actually play. Because of course the raw output from the patch is just a bunch of dots on the page. It's impossible to make sense.
It must be very must have also been quite a job too. And you arrange it for one guitar or multiple? Like how many voices do you use?
It's 4 voices, 1 guitar. Now, if I had 3 more victims, I would do guitar, violins. I could do a whole bunch of different things. I still have the original source material, so I could always arrange it to be different things. And it's fascinating because when you look at the score, you can, and especially if you're looking at individual voices, you can actually see as the Krell functions get faster, the notes get denser, and as the underlying LFOs get higher, then you see the musical parts getting higher. And then you can actually see the point in which the keys change, and then suddenly sharps and flats will come and go.
Cool. Super nice.
I'm hoping that album will be finished and on my Bandcamp in about 3 months, but we'll see.
I mean, best to take your time and make it proper, huh? Always.
I have to record it. I have to. My brother's got to practice it, and then we've got to do a live recording of it.
Cool. Yeah. Is there a module that you really like also? Or is it for you really about the system?
It is really about the system. I have to admit, I fell in love with Eric Schlappy's three-body oscillator while I was at Dutch Modular Fest.
Mm.
I was fortunate enough to have dinner with Eric Schlappy, Ben, who's famous for being Div Kid,
Yeah.
and Ben's brilliant friend Matt. And those guys are from Yorkshire, I believe. They come over to see it. Eric, I think, came from Paris and was showing off his modules. And his three-body oscillator is really amazing. Like, it's just a beautiful sounding device. Lots and lots of minute control over the intermodulation of these three oscillators, right up into high audio rate, but also crazy. It'll go crazy too. And then you can split it out to be three oscillators. It'll do all these interesting stereo things. You know, that could be the center of a fascinating system. You know, I think that's it's big, so I don't know that I could ever travel with one, but it's such a beautiful sounding device. I don't know how long it'll be I can keep from buying one. I am I'm a fan also of some older interesting pieces, like the old clay sequencer. I've got one on my rig kind of over here, the big Euro sequencer that uses shift generators or shift so what it does is it lets you have more than one stage of the sequence active. So it's very similar to the Turing machine, like that kind of thing.
Exactly. Oh, that's super interesting also. It's very powerful.
Still a huge
sequencer can do that.
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of IntelliGel's original shapeshifter. I think that's kind of a must-have. That would be like a desert island module for me. It's two oscillators. It's also executed in FPG the same way that the three-body is. They're gorgeous sounding wavetable, but it can do all kinds of intermodulation.
It's a powerhouse.
Has one of Doc Sketchy's analog wavefolders on it too.
Yeah.
So and I barely scratched the surface of it. It has a beautiful sound. But I'm also in love with, and that's what we heard at Dutch Modular Fest, I'm in love with Doepfer's new line of polyphonic modules. Not only could you build a polysynth, which obviously, you know, isn't the best use for them, but they're so dense. And for Doepfer modules, we don't see that a lot. But I really, when I did Dutch Modular Fest, I really wanted an analog signal path. So I used one of his 4-channel analog oscillators, his 4-channel 24 dB per octave filter, and then 4 channels of analog wavefolding, and his 8-channel VCA. And all of that stuff fits into a space only about this big.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then paired that up with an IntelliGel Quadrax and some utilities and some drum stuff, and then I was ready to go. I'm not so entranced by individual modules that I would see something that I've already got to go get something else.
Okay. Well, that was a very nice talk. I've asked about everything that I wanted to know.
Yeah. And I wish you the best of luck in your studies, and I look forward to seeing more pencils.
Thank you. And well, if the album comes out, I'm sure to check it.
Yeah, I've got 3 coming out because I after leaving Utrecht, I traveled and spent another week in Amsterdam. I recorded an album there. That's entitled In Broken, the De Wallen mix. That's a very, very interesting, very different sounding album from the other ones that I did. And then I traveled to London, spent 10 days there, and I did a very interesting, probably one of my favorite albums I've ever done. And it's entitled Full English Breakfast. And it comes out probably within the next month, I would think. That mix is all finished. I'll send you a copy of it. It's a beautiful recording. It's long, so it's a 5-part polyphonic Krell patch with vocoder and percussion. It was performed on
Yeah, it was
location.
on the same system then as your Dutch Modular Fest system, right?
The same system. I had retuned it, made some changes to it. It's a lot more pastoral sounding, a lot calmer sounding, and it's about 49 minutes long. It was one long take, so it was exhausting.
Yeah.
But that album really tried to capture the sense of being in London the day after the Queen of England died, during this terrible period where Ukraine was under attack from Russia. So London just had this sort of dark sense about it. And the way that Londoners were coping with that is certainly different from folks in Amsterdam. So I wanted to kind of capture that feeling.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I will send you a copy of it. I've got a big MP3 of it. Yep. You can have a.
Thanks. Okay. Then, well, good luck with finishing the recording up. And
yes.
I'll speak to you later.
Yes, and good luck with you in your studies.
Yes, thank you. Bye.
All right, thank you so much. Bye-bye.